Go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
We're here today to allow citizens from around the country to be able to speak about what these proposals mean to tens of millions of Americans.
Michigan U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democratic senators and rural health care providers testified Wednesday that Trump care would devastate rural health care. Republican Senate leaders are conspiring in secret to destroy the Affordable Care Act and replace it with something that covers less and costs more with not a single public hearing. So Democrats held their own hearing on Trump care's impact on health care in rural America.
These proposals they're putting together will devastate rural communities. Medicaid covers nearly half of the children in small towns and rural areas in Michigan and across the country. Half. Medicaid covers more than half of all seniors in nursing homes. The Republicans are proposing legislation that will gut Medicaid health care.
Washington Senator Patty Murray says based on what's known so far about the Republican health care bills, Trump care would be a disaster for rural America.
By allowing insurance companies to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions, Trump care will disproportionately hurt families in rural communities. And this bill, by ending Medicaid as we know it, would put a lot of our rural hospitals at risk of closure. In addition to raising health care costs and throwing tens of millions of people off coverage.
Oregon Senator Ron Wyden.
This House bill would hit Oregon and rural communities like a wrecking ball.
Phil Ennin heads community hospitals and wellness centers in Ohio.
Passage of the AHCA means we're looking at millions of dollars of revenue losses. The very survival of our independent hospital is in play.
Chuck Duarte is the CEO of Community Health Alliance in Nevada.
Potential loss of health coverage for tens of thousands of rural Nevadans will also make it more difficult for them to afford care. It'll result in delays in care, exacerbation of chronic disease, and delays in getting addiction services and mental health services, which will result in death.
Immigrants are marching here, no papers, no fear. Immigrants are marching here, no papers, no fear.
Union members and community supporters rallied in San Francisco to protest the ICE detention of Painters Union member Hugo Mejia and United Brotherhood of Carpenters member Rodrigo Nunez. The two were handed over to ICE when they showed up for work at Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. They've been in detention for over a month with no hearing yet on their cases. Hugo has been a Painters Union member for 10 years. Nady Dominguez is with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades.
We are here because what's happening to Hugo and Rodrigo is not just unfair, but unjust.
WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. The horrible Health Care Act. Well, they're dropping something. There will be a discussion draft. I believe it's already been dropped. We now get to know what the 13 rich white guys in a cloakroom off the unfindable at the Capitol have come up with. What have the 13 white rich millionaire guys birthed for us to endure? I still love the Washington Post editorial that basically lays it out. And look, I've said this a bunch, but they wrote it very, very succinctly and very to the point. Remember when Obamacare was written hastily, behind closed doors, in secret negotiations, so that Democrats could jam an unpopular health care bill through Congress? Remember that? Remember when this showed that they didn't care what was in it and that they had betrayed the trust of the American people? Remember when the issue of health reform was too important not to take the time to get right? They were, well, the Republicans are hoping you don't remember, or that you will forget now that the shoe is on the other foot. And they point out, look, that, criticism after criticism that the Republicans have lobbed at Democrats over the years about how the Affordable Care Act was passed apply to a far greater extent to the health care bill the GOP leadership is drafting covertly. And look, this is, it was a year and a half, really. I mean, it didn't pass until, into 2010, something we had been talking about since the election in 2008. In fact, I remember saying what we needed was single payer, public option at the minimum. Got neither. Got a Republican plan. And understand what the Affordable Care Act was. It was the answer to Hillary Care in the 90s. It was Romney Care in the 2000s. And it was the answer that centrist Democrats thought Republicans, and wrongfully thought Republicans would coalesce around, because it was their idea. And immediately the Republicans, drew a line in the sand. No, they were the party obstruction. They were the party of gridlock, all of that. But yet the Democrats cobbled together 60 votes and passed this into law. All of it will be undone if they can get 50 senators. Think about this for a second. You needed a supermajority to pass it. We can destroy it with 50 senators and Mike Pence. Let that sink in for a second. Because what was debated back then, and look, Nancy Pelosi said the dumbest thing ever possible. And no one ever said that she was the brightest bulb in the box. But the reality is this bill was vetted, was argued, and here we are now. They want to pass this by the 4th of July recess. We're only days away from that. They're just now dropping a discussion draft. It's not even the actual draft, because I don't even think they've got that yet. This is just kind of bullet points. Kind of, well, these are our general thoughts. And how many people we're allowing to be killed next year or into the future because they're not going to have health care. That's really what this is. And there are a bunch of questions. I mean, I want to see if the Senate bill is any less, to use a Donald Trump frame, mean. Is it any less mean than the House bill? And please, by the way, stop calling this Trump care. This is not Trump care, because I don't want at the end of this the Republican Party to turn and go, well, it was Donald Trump's plan. It wasn't ours. No, this is the Republicans' plan. They have bought this. They are going to own it. This is what the Republicans, the fringe, has always wanted, which is to completely destroy and gut the social safety net in this country. Medicaid, this destroys Medicaid. So that safety net that was under the feet of the poor in our community, and oh, by the way, seniors who went to the polls angry, government, get your hands off my Medicare. Well, guess what? Government, under the Republican rule, is stripping you of Medicaid. So there's no floor under your feet. The only floor under your feet, seniors, is the street curb out there. Because if you can't afford to pay for a nursing home, you can't go to nursing care in your golden years, guess what? Out with the trash. Or, oh no, wait. Charity. Yeah, I remember Charity. I remember those horrible places where they warehoused seniors. And the stories that people told me about those horrible warehouses where they just, well, it was basically debtor's prison for old people. We're going back to that. This is what they want. This is the free market. So the other question is, how badly is Medicaid destroyed in all this? How much more tattered and shredded can the social safety net be? We may find out. And again, priorities. You got to know what the priorities of the party is, not just Donald Trump, because Donald Trump already said this is mean. So Trump care would be less mean than this. Now, there's some interesting storylines, some things to come around. How will Rand Paul react? What are you going to get out of Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski? What's Ted Cruz going to do? Senator Lee, a bunch of the fringe people who want to be on center stage and need the attention. Again, people whose mothers should have held them more often. Maybe even breastfed, who knows? But you got these people who need the attention, and we'll see how this goes. And, a bunch of questions, what are the Democrats going to do? Will we find some centrists who go, okay, will we find a Joe Manchin who goes, yeah, okay, I'm going to be a Republican anyway. It's going to be interesting to see when these stories pop up. Now, don't expect anything great. In fact, if you're a middle-class worker in this country, this is going to screw you just as bad as it's going to harm someone at the bottom. Because, look, if you're already poor, it can't get much worse. This is going to harm the working class of this country in ways that no one has been honest about. Because once the bottom falls out of this and we go back to the system of the poor and the lower working class income folks using the emergency rooms that they can find as primary care offices, and we have to pay for that. Understand that insurance for everybody is going to continue to skyrocket. And I love this nonsensical argument that, well, under Obamacare, premiums have gone up. Of course they have, you dimwits. They've always gone up. And guess what's happened? And the numbers are in. It hasn't gone up as much. It did what it was supposed to do. It began to bring down the inflation. Once we take this out, once we take those parameters out, it's through the roof. Because understand, before the Affordable Care Act, healthcare costs were going up and up and up and up, and really an outrageous amount. And there's part of me that goes, maybe we need this. Maybe we need a collapse of the system to where we start thinking again, in a very, and I hate to use it because I know people are going to go running, he said socialist, but in a very community kind of way. Go back to the idea of community hospitals. Go back to the idea that healthcare is something that we do for ourselves collectively because we can't do it alone. If you've ever had a major illness, and I've talked to hundreds of people who've gone, you know what, this happened to me, and it would have wiped me out, not just what I have, but everything I'll ever have. Kid got cancer. That's bankruptcy. Lost the house. Lost jobs. Is this the world we want? This is the world the Republicans want for us. They want pay or die. And I've been very clear about that from the beginning. That's their ideology. That's their blind faith belief. That's their religion. The invisible hand. And if you just happen to be unlucky, well, tough luck. Sad, scary stuff. Lots of that to get to today. Some thoughts on, well, there's a lot of stuff going on that we're not paying attention to. While we're focused on Russia, while we're focused on all of the distractions and the tweets, this administration is decimating the workforce. The rulings, the executive orders, the policy changes, absolutely terrible. And when we come back, we're going to talk with our good friend Paul Segunda, professor of law and the director of labor and employment there at Marquette University. Just about some of the just stealth things that are going on and how it's going to affect work in this country. Quick break, right back with Professor Segunda.
All of my life I have searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day that the Cuyahoga River, which winds its way through Cleveland, Ohio, caught on fire. Cleveland was once the 6th largest city in the nation. During the early 20th century, the city had a booming steel industry. Clevelander John D. Rockefeller made the city a leader in oil refining. But after World War II, industries left strong union cities like Cleveland and Detroit. These jobs moved south and overseas, where wealthy industrialists could exploit workers in markets with weak labor protections. As a result, Cleveland fell on hard times. During the 1960s, the city lost 150,000 residents. As jobs left town, so did the workers. The once proud factories that lined the banks of the Cuyahoga River had brought jobs to the city, but they also pumped pollution into the waterway. When a passing train put off sparks, the river oozing with oil and debris caught fire. It was not the first time that the river ignited. Time magazine posted dramatic photos of the burning river, although the photos were actually from an earlier blaze. The pictures helped to fuel the growing environmental movement. They gave momentum to the passage of the Clean Water Act. The Cuyahoga was not the only urban river impacted by industry. The Time article described how, quote, Omaha's meat packers filled the Missouri River with animal grease balls as big as oranges. Today, one of Cleveland's breweries sells a popular Burning River Pale Ale. The Burning River is part of the history and the folklore of the city.
Burn on, big river, burn on. Burn on, big river.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Going to work could be the death of you and me, but we're not unarmed. Our weapon, solidarity. Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood, the list goes on and on. With every year that passes, 60,000 more gone. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers, and it's time we started calling the shots.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So yesterday we talked a little bit about what the Department of Labor is doing, what the Trump administration is doing, what Republicans are doing through the back door, while we're focused on all of the distraction, all of the Russia, all of the tweets, all of the shiny stuff. What's the Department of Labor? What are the executive orders doing to workers here in the country? You look at the Republican House passing the Working Families Flexibility Act, which ends overtime. You look at the fact that the Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta, just reversed two major departmental policies that regulated employers and independent contractors. So we're going back to, hey, you're your own boss. You get to shoulder all of the responsibilities and none of the gains. That's why I've asked our good friend Paul Segunda, professor of law and the director of labor and employment law program there at Marquette University, to talk with us and share some of why this stuff's important. Paul, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, nice to be back.
I look at just what we're not seeing. Look, I mean, there's all the distractions, there's all the shiny stuff. This stuff is I think just as important, if not more so.
I agree, and in fact, of course, the Senate GOP just dropped this despicable healthcare reform, which is not a healthcare reform at all. It's a tax giveaway to the rich on the back of the poor, and in the form of a substantial, grievous cut in Medicaid for the poor and the disabled. In that same bill, they get rid of the employer mandate. Remember, the employer mandate is the one that requires employers either to provide retirement and healthcare most importantly, and if they don't, they have to provide some kind of subsidy to help their employees get healthcare on the healthcare markets. Well, all that's going to be gone. under this version of the Senate bill. The Senate said it would be much more, moderate and not as harsh as the House version. And in fact, there's almost no difference whatsoever. And the biggest employee impact is that there are going to be millions of employees who are now getting their health insurance on these marketplaces who are going to be completely out of luck, either because they can't afford health insurance or because they have pre-existing conditions, which are not fully dealt with under this new bill.
And again, is this what the people who wanted to repeal and replace, is this what they wanted? I mean, because I remember during the campaign, Trump was screaming about it. It's going to be tremendous. We're going to cover everybody. It's going to be great. He's even called this stuff mean. Is this what people voted for?
Well, no. And this is what I actually tweeted yesterday on my own account, which was, those union workers especially must be feeling very conned right now, because they thought this guy was going to keep their jobs in the United States, that he was going to revitalize the manufacturing sector, all these flagging industries. But in fact, from his own businesses, where all of his products are made in Indonesia or China or somewhere else, to the fact that the jobs that are left are hardly jobs. There's no benefits. As you just pointed out, everyone's going to be an independent contractor, their own bosses, without any benefits and with all the responsibility. And then you just mentioned, Rick, all these actions that are being taken by the House and the Senate, by the Department of Labor, even the independent agencies, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the National Labor Relations Board. Things are happening, maybe not as quickly as we thought, but they're happening. And if you add them all up, the impact on working class men and women in the United States is going to be devastating.
And it's going to be one of those things. And I've been saying this for a while. I mean, all of this stuff in the background, all of this stealth stuff, look, I mean, there was a huge fight against Andy Puzder, as the Department of Labor had. And there was a big victory. And this Acosta guy just, strolled right in without any resistance. And he's doing all of the horrible things that we expected Puzder to do.
Yeah, a lot of it is just Republican agenda. So it really doesn't matter who's there, to be honest with you.
Right.
Because this is their agenda. Their agenda, to make it as simple and as easy to understand for the listeners out there, is to cut taxes for the rich, for the corporate interests, and to make employees' voices silent. Why? For one simple reason: to increase corporate profits. That's all this is about. Whether you look at the new push to get rid of fair share fees in the public sector, or right to work, as it's called, in the private sector, whether you look at the flexibility law that gets rid of overtime, whether you look at getting rid of the persuader law, which means that you don't have to say when you use anti-union consultants, whether you're talking about the fiduciary rule, which would require people to get honest retirement advice when they're working with their 401k. All of these laws have one common denominator. They favor employers, they hurt employees, and they decimate unions by taking away money from them.
Yeah, and in the ever-going war between capital and labor, they are decidedly on the side of capital.
Decidedly, and unfortunately, and we saw this in Georgia the other night, they're winning. They have convinced, unfortunately, a large segment of the working class that they are their best bet for succeeding in the United States. And if progressives and Democrats are going to be successful in 2018 and thereafter, we got to get these working men and women back on the progressive side. That is the essential, most important thing. And the way we do it is doing what you and I are doing right now, which is educating people and letting them understand, in words that everyone can understand, that this agenda hurts workers.
Yep. For the last couple of days, we've had representatives from the International Brotherhood of Teamsters on talking about the port strike out on the West Coast.
Yep.
And, the concept of independent contractor has come up numerous times, because I look at what's going on there as the model of future employment in this country, because so many people are in the gig economy. You're your own boss. No more are we going to see the kind of employment law that my generation is used to. And I look at, this independent contractor thing as fairly important. And
it's very important.
With Acosta coming out now and saying, we're going to do away with that rule of the past, that joint employer idea, gone, done. The six, I guess there were 6 standards that they set in 2015. That's out the window. So basically, anybody is an independent contractor, even if, Paul, I get to tell you when to show up to work, what to do, what clothes to wear, how to do it, where to do it, all of that. You're still an independent contractor. That's nuts to me.
Well, and there is some good news here, and that is that Acosta, the Department of Labor, the new EEOC under Republican control, they're putting in one of their Republican people on the National Labor Relations Board, Marvin Kaplan. All these people only have so much power. Let me explain. The independent contractor rule, which separates who's an employee covered by employment law and who's an independent contractor not covered by employee law, and the joint employer rule, which goes to whether an employee can have one or more employers, are not actually decided by Alex Acosta, the Department of Labor, or any of these independent employment agencies. These are actually common law rules that judges apply. Now, all things being equal, if you could have a guidance from the EEOC or for the NLRB saying, we believe under these circumstances, this employer is a joint employer and therefore can be held liable for various types of labor violations, that would be great. But on the other hand, you have to understand that regardless of the position that the Department of Labor or any of these agencies take, the actual application of the law is going to be undertaken by judges, judges in the state courts, judges in the federal courts. My thought on this, Rick, is that eventually what's going to happen, this is going to percolate. This is going to make its way up through the federal circuit court. There's going to be a division of authority. That is, courts are going to disagree. And, of course, it's going to make it to the Supreme Court.
Right.
This is why it's so important, just to kind of give you the big picture, why it's so important that by 2018 and certainly by 2020, Democrats are first back in control of some of the legislature, federally and state, and then, of course, get the presidency back in 2020, because if not, we could have a very scary Supreme Court, which is basically going to put its imprimatur on these very pro-employer, anti-employee policies.
I got to tell you, I love your optimism. We could have a scary Supreme Court. I would argue we already do.
Yeah.
I mean, I would look at the
tell
stolen
people all the
seat.
time.
And, I look at the guy we just put into the stolen seat who would prefer that a truck driver die on the side of the road than to seek shelter.
No, I agree with you. And I was talking to another reporter from another progressive publication yesterday, and she said to me, what are the chances that this joint employer rule goes up soon to the Supreme Court? And for the same reasons I just told you, I don't think it's going to happen soon, which is good, because I said to her, we don't want any employee disputes going to the Supreme Court right now, because if Anthony Kennedy is your best bet, you're in a lot of trouble, because that man is very right of center, and he has a history of voting for employer interests. So let me just go back on one other point that you made about the gig economy. I've been thinking a lot about this. These workers who work for companies like Uber or Lyft or Handy or Amazon Turk, these workers who basically work through an internet platform. They sell their services through these companies to buyers, so like ride sharing or performing tasks. And the problem is this. There's really a division in the types of workers here. Some people use this type of employment as supplementary. That is, they'll take out a car and drive it 10 to 15 hours a week. In addition to their other job, they'll try to make some extra money on the side.
Right.
Now, the good news for those people is if they have full employment elsewhere, they're likely going to have benefits and other entitlements. The people that I'm most concerned about are what I call the precariat. The precariat, and you're probably familiar with this term, Rick, are the precarious workers. That is, they have no safety net. They have no benefits. They have no chance. And for those people who, with one gig company, or let's say a combination of gig companies, work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, I think personally, under existing law, again, this common law of who's an employee and who's an independent contractor, this goes down to misclassification. I think these are employees. And in fact, I have been backed up not only with various tribunals here in the United States. In California, for instance, they found some of these workers to be employees for unemployment compensation purposes, but in other parts of the world, in the United Kingdom, in Switzerland, they've been found to be employees. So unfortunately, I think the most pragmatic thing that we can do for these gig workers, those who actually work essentially full-time at the gig workforce, is to make them employees under existing law, or argue that they're employees under existing law, so they can get benefits. Because all the other approaches, and we have a number of approaches regarding so-called portable benefits and other ways that we can protect these workers in the workplace, they're all somewhat unrealistic in the current environment. I mean, we're not going to get new legislation that sets up a third form of employment, dependent contractors. We are not going to get, as we've been talking about, beneficial regulation or legislation from the Congress or from the relevant agencies. So for me, the best thing we can do is focus on the existing law and make the very sound argument that for full-time gig workers, they are employees. And as employees, they have rights under ERISA to retirement benefits and health care. They have rights under the Fair Labor Standards Act to minimum wage and to overtime. They have rights under the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to be free from sexual harassment, employment discrimination, and so forth. So to me, that's the best way forward under the current circumstances in which we live.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, but here's the problem. Who's going to fight for those workers? I mean, lawsuits, litigation is not only costly, but it's also time. It's time consuming. Who can wait that period? Who's going to fight that? Especially at a time when labor unions are under such attack. It seems, look, here in Pennsylvania, the next election in 2018, right to work is going to be the issue. As you've got a guy who not only wants to make right to work the law, he wants a constitutional amendment to ensure that this poison becomes permanent in our state's constitution.
Yeah, and we have the same thing here in Wisconsin. I mean, we've had Scott Walker for 6 years, so everything that's happening federally in the United States right now has basically already happened in Wisconsin, where workers' rights have been devastated, and they're looking to hold a constitutional convention right now, and one of the things they want to do is enshrine right to work. There's good and bad news here. The good news is obvious, which is there are unions, there are strong unions, and the more sophisticated workers understand that their ultimate weapon is their own labor and this idea of solidarity. If they work together, if they stay united, if they use their collective power, then they can achieve anything. There's nothing you can't achieve, and I love your segments on labor history because it shows you, against all odds, over and over again, workers have prevailed under daunting circumstances. So that's the good news. The bad news is to succeed in this environment where union coffers are being decimated, where unions are being increasingly faced with an uneven playing field with regard to the types of laws and regulations that they have to operate under. It's going to take even more willpower, more cohesion, more solidarity. And again, the whole Trump phenomenon is a little discouraging because it shows that at least a segment of current and maybe former union members have been willing to kind of drink the Kool-Aid, if you will, and think that this guy is somehow going to help them. And as we're trying to show, you through your show every day and me in my writings and my op-eds and doing all these press interviews, it's just not the case. And if we can get these people to wake up, Rick, nothing is impossible to get us back on track, to get unions back in the workplace, and to get workers, the voice they need to have a fair and equitable workplace.
Yeah, I mean, as I've been saying on this show a long time, every generation has to rediscover that concept of solidarity. And maybe it takes this kind of a crisis, this kind of a beating, these kicks in the teeth, be it healthcare, be it exploitation on the job. At some point, people are going to eat so much of you-know-what before they stand up and say enough already. Yeah, and a lot of people, as you know, Tuesday night were discouraged by the loss in the Georgia House race, but you got to remember that was Newt Gingrich's district, the current health secretary's district. That district had been won by Republicans from anywhere from 20 to 40%. Ossoff, a newcomer, 30 years old, lost by 3%. With lots of problems.
Yeah, he lost, and he might not have been the right candidate, but we did pick up somewhere around 20 percentage points in a very Republican gerrymandered district. So I actually think if you look around, you look at Trump's approval rating, which is about 35% right now, and you look at the number of House races coming up, which are going to be closer than what Ossoff had to deal with. There's about 47, I've seen some analyses. I think there's no reason why we can't take back the House in 2018. It's going to be harder in the Senate because there's twice as many seats Democrats are defending, but in the House, I think it's possible.
Yeah, you need one of the branches of government to slow this train down. And fortunately, I'll be honest, fortunately, the president has been horribly dysfunctional, has been all over the map, has just been schizophrenic, if you will, because if they really had their act together, the steamroller could really run us over.
And he is his own worst enemy. He sabotages himself all the time.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah, thank goodness for that. And I have to say something, and this is going to sound a little provocative, but maybe it's good that some of these laws go through. Maybe it's good that people see their health care go away, because it's almost like people need a wake-up call before they start getting angry and they realize, how can you blame the Democrats when literally the Republicans are in control of every branch of government, right? How can you really, honestly, if this health care bill goes through and people in the millions start losing their health care, who are they going to blame?
That's the question. And I've said often, maybe we need the pain. And I had hoped the collapse in 2008 would have been that painful moment where people woke up and go, wait a second, something's crazy here. We're at that moment in history where wages have been stagnant for 30, 40 years. People are losing their jobs. People are losing standard of living. Things are not right. And working people, they get this. And maybe we're seeing that 1930s moment again. At least I'm hoping. Yeah,
we're certainly there, and I think we're there already. And it's just about getting people to recognize it. And I guess another kind of good news thing, so we're not too pessimistic here, is that I do think the internet, social media, will help us move quicker than we've been able to move in the past. If we harness technology and use that to spread transparency, accountability, education, I think the true story favors us, right? We're on the side of the right and the good. So I think the more we get that out there, the better off we are.
I'm right there with you, Paul. I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you. You do fantastic work. I hope people will take a look at it. We'll get a link at the ricksmithshow.com of how people can check out your writing. Fantastic stuff. I appreciate the time.
You too, Rick. Keep up the good work.
Always great talking to our friend Paul Segunda. And look, he's absolutely right. At the end of the day, maybe some of this poison is good for us. Maybe a little of this is, going to wake us up. Maybe the wake-up call is what we need. Quick break. Right back.
They can lock us out, they can lock us up. We cannot give in. No more lies, no compromise. We'll battle till we win. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. And it's time we started calling the shots.
I think of freedom in positive aspirational terms, such as found in FDR's Four Freedoms, or in the uplifting songs of freedom sung by oppressed people everywhere. But right-wing ideologues have fabricated a negative notion of freedoms derived from their twisted concept of individual choice. You're, quote, free to be poor, to be politically powerless, or to be ill and uncared for, they say. It's all a matter of decisions you freely make, and our government has no business interfering with your free will. This is what passes as a philosophical framework guiding today's Republican congressional leaders. For example, they say their plan to eliminate health coverage for millions of Americans and to cut such essential benefits as maternity care for millions more is just a matter of good old free market consumerism. As explained by Jason Chavitz, a Utah Tea Party Republican, Americans have choices. And so, maybe rather than getting that new iPhone that they just love and they want to go spend hundreds of dollars on that, maybe they should invest in their own health care. Lest you think that Jason must simply be an oddball jerk, here's a similar deep insight from the top House Republican, Speaker Paul Ryan. Freedom is the ability to buy what you want to fit what you need. Yes, apparently you are as free as you can afford to be. As Vice President Mike Pence recently barked, Trump Care's your own philosophy is all about, quote, bringing freedom and individual responsibility back to American health care. This is Jim Hightower saying, the GOP's austere view is that getting treatment for your spouse's cancer should be like buying a new pair of shoes, a free market decision by customers who choose their own price point, from Neiman Marcus to Goodwill, and some go barefoot. But then, that's their choice.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
In the factories and mills, in the shipyards and mines, we've often been told to keep up with the times, for our skills are not needed. They've streamlined the job and with slide rule and stopwatch, our pride they have wrong. We're the first ones to stop, we're the first ones to die, the first ones in line for that pie in the sky, and we're always the last when the grain is set out for the workers.
Yes, so the workers are working while the fat cat's about. And look, at the end of the day, this health care bill is what it's really about. You want to talk about pie in the sky? Things will be much better once you're no longer here. And we give tax breaks to the very wealthy, and we continue the business-friendly mentality. And when Paul said that, in this healthcare bill, and it's something that I've said in the past, the employer mandate gone. Immediately, I thought back to Papa John's, which is why we will never eat Papa John's pizza in my house. It's never going to happen. I will never buy one ever. I shouldn't say ever. If he unionizes and there's a chance. That's never going to happen. But the employer mandate being gone, and you remember all of the whining and the complaining and all of the I can't. It's going to destroy us. Well, here we are. I haven't seen a lot of Papa John's going out of business, but I have seen their employees getting some bit of health care. At the end of it, this actually worked. And what's not talked about at all are the people who get employer-sponsored health care because it's mandated, who are going to lose it. Or worse yet, there's one thing saying, okay, I don't have anything. There's the other part of this of going back to those crappy mini plans, the micro plans of the past where you go, hey, I've got health insurance, until you go to use it and you realize it doesn't pay for anything. It's more of a discount card. It's more of a, we'll give you 10% off a heart attack. And you go to use it and bankrupt. This happened. This is where we came from. Why do we want to go back? Honestly, I think about, right when I first started working, I had gotten a job as a security guard. And because I wanted to go to school, during the days and then do my homework at night and have someone pay me while doing it. And, sitting watching a monitor is not difficult. You read, do your work, whatever. And I remember, for like $80 a week, I could get this health care. And I go, okay, that sounds reasonable. So now understand, making, $4 an hour, $80 a week is a lot of money. So I got sick and I went to the doctor and they said, oh, we don't accept that. And the guy goes, virtually nobody accepts that. And I'm going, well, what's the point of having it? He goes, there's really not. And it was at that moment, at a young age, realizing that, you know what? It's a ripoff. It's a screw job. And we're going back to those days because I'm already seeing the commercials popping up of, hey, we can get you health insurance really cheap. I had a guy who's a truck driver selling insurance as a hobby, as his part-time gig. And I said, okay, you can save me money on health insurance. What's in it? Well, I don't know. It's just cheaper. That's the line I want to hear. I don't know what's in it. It's cheaper. Scary times, my friends. Scary times. Quick break. Right back with our good friends, Talk Media News. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
And I go to work at night. I got no time for living, yes. I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1999. That was the day 5,000 textile workers at 6 Fieldcrest Cannon Mills in North Carolina began voting for representation by the Union of Needle Trades, Industrial and Textile Employees, better known as Unite. The victory, later validated by the NLRB, was a significant win for labor in the anti-union South. The union's organizing director, Bruce Ronner, stated, quote, "It feels like we just organized GM. Suddenly, we've got a beacon to show other textile workers that they can do it." Labor historian Leon Fink noted that, quote, "It's a stunning victory for the union. It's the biggest breakthrough in a traditional Southern industry for probably the last quarter century." Then AFL-CIO President John Sweeney remarked that it was the largest union victory in a Southern textile mill in history. The election and victory came after 25 years of struggle and 4 previous attempts to organize at Fieldcrest Cannon Mills. Many noted that the young immigrant workforce made the difference. Conditions had been worsening at the mills. Workers, fed up with production line speed up, punitive decreases in piecework premiums, and company harassment, were compelled to vote union. One worker stated that he and many others were sick of lies management told to keep workers from voting yes in previous elections. Supervisors routinely intimidated workers to vote no with promises of higher wages, or when that failed, threats of deportation. Workers were barraged with various forms of anti-union propaganda. They found anti-union videos mailed to their homes. Some were paid extra to distribute Vote No t-shirts on the shop floor. The company finally recognized the union and negotiated a first contract that guaranteed higher wages, pensions, and other benefits.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So the Toronto Star, yes, the Toronto Star, they've pointed out that since the anniversary of the famous 2015 speech where Donald Trump, announced his presidency, the president has lied. I guess it's inauguration day. They're saying that he's lied at least 2.1 times each and every day. And they say, look, we can't call them actually lies. They're just false. They're just things that he got completely wrong. And you got to question if the guy that gets everything wrong is the guy you really want negotiating for you on anything, let alone things that are really, really important like healthcare. Just scary stuff. Anyway, let's find out what's going on now that the discussion draft has dropped. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you.
A discussion draft, huh?
Well, yes, but I'm checking my Twitter feed, and AP's congressional correspondent, and AP tend to think they probably know what they're doing. She just tweeted that she's just seen or heard that it's not dropping at 9:30, which is what they heard for Republican senators. She says, this is Erica Werner, hearing senators were not actually given the health bill at 9:30 meeting and told they would get it at 11 along with everyone else.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that extra hour and a half was really going to make a huge difference. And unless it's a 3-page bill like Herman Cain wanted.
But why didn't they get it at 9:30? I mean, they does that mean, because it doesn't say, does that mean they didn't have the 9:30 meeting? And if they did have it, what happened in the 9:30 meeting?
Exactly. Well, what happened is the person who was supposed to print it out woke up late, little traffic, running behind, or maybe the printer was jammed.
Oh, Matt Fuller, who does Congress and stuff for HuffPost, he says, I count 94 reporters staking out this healthcare meeting with more hiding elsewhere. Also, we can get, I haven't read the bill yet.
No, I don't think anybody really
That's
has.
what they're saying. That's what all the senators are saying to them. 94 reporters he's counted.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I see. Here's the thing. I seem to remember, and and I'll go back and quote the Washington Post editorial that said, you remember when the Democrats did health care reform, and they did it in the dark of night, and they rammed it down their throat behind closed doors, secret negotiations to jam an unpopular health care bill through Congress. Remember when they showed that they didn't care what was in it, and they betrayed the trust of the American people? Remember? And as they point out, the Republican far greater extent of what the Republicans have done than what they claim the Democrats did.
What is extraordinary about this bill that's coming out is not only is it going to be, because some people say, well, it's just I was reading some of the things that it does this morning to one of my very, very conservative talk show hosts, and he's saying, oh, so it's just tweaks. It's just tweaks to Obamacare. I said, well, it's getting rid of the individual mandate, getting rid of the employer mandate. That's just tweaks.
No, those are major. Well, that basically changes the whole thing, does it not? Now, here's the thing. I've been hearing people say Trump care, and I got to be honest. I'm not a Trump care. I'm not on the Trump care bandwagon. This is Republican care. At the end of the day, I don't want them coming around and going, oh, well, this is what Donald Trump wanted, and we just did what our president said. That's his fault. No. This is what the Republicans want. They want pay or die. They've always wanted it. This is their baby. They're stuck with it.
I see. Yes. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Well, no, that is, Trump care is starting to catch on with the Democrats, who, once again, either a market, maybe they don't know messaging and they don't know marketing.
No, my problem is honestly, how much input did Donald Trump actually have in this bill? To me, this is Paul Ryan's doing, and McConnell's just kind of carrying the water along.
Well, Donald Trump had very little input into the House health bill. Those representatives who went to the White House, traipsed up to the White House to negotiate when they were having difficulties, they came back saying that he didn't know what was in the bill.
Nobody knows what's in the bill.
No, but this is the House. I'm talking about the House bill.
Right.
They said he didn't know what was in the House bill. They said he literally didn't know what was in the bill, that he wasn't interested in the details. So why would he know what's in the Senate bill?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. He thought Frederick Douglass is still doing work. He thought we just built the Panama Canal. You can go down the list of the crazy stuff that he thinks. What would make any of us think that he knows what's in any piece of legislation?
Well, I don't think he's that well, he proposed a law last night that would stop new immigrants from receiving social benefits for the first 5 years that they're in the country.
Yeah, you mean the law that's already in place?
It's been here since 1996 when it was passed by Bill Clinton.
Exactly. The law that's already been in place. That's great. Good for him.
And his crowd cheered it because, they thought it was a good idea. Now, I think if somebody had then jumped up on the stage and said, well, Bill Clinton passed this in 1996, I don't know what the crowd would have done.
They would have booed. Exactly, because you said Clinton. That's all you have to do. And look, at the end of it, that's how insane our political process has gotten.
The discussion draft is out. And it's out. And they're off.
Exactly, because here's the thing.
Somebody's on the inside straight, and he's coming in on the outside. It's out.
It's out. Because here's the thing. Obamacare was the answer to Hillary Care of the 90s. It was the Republican plan. And Republicans were all in favor of it. I remember those days of my Republican friends saying, you don't want people to have personal responsibility. And yet here we are. Here we are with saying, no, we shouldn't have an employer mandate. We shouldn't have an individual mandate because why should people be personally responsible?
It's a question of what do you mean by personally responsible? You mean personally responsible for that stroke? Personally responsible for that bale of hay that fell on your head?
Is there a lot of that? There are a lot of people get hay dropped on their head?
I don't know. I just made that up. It's the only thing that came to me. All right.
Hey, look, in my neighborhood, that's possible. You living in Washington, D.C., I don't know how many bales of hay are falling from the sky.
The president was in Iowa last night. I'm still a little bit in Iowa.
Iowa mode. Okay, now that makes sense. Because he was in Iowa. He wanted to get out of the swamp, he said.
Yes.
Yes. Heard it was very, very entertaining.
Oh, you've got to read the New York Times story. The New York Times story is actually incredibly funny. Maggie Haberman is just a very, very, very talented writer. She's just very clever. Yeah, very, very funny.
I read some of it this morning, and I was chuckling at and you tie that in with the Toronto Star saying 2.1 times a day you've got some falsehood coming out of his mouth.
Well, and at one point he stopped himself, saying, "I've got to be careful. They'll say he lied."
Of course, because that's never mind. Just crazy stuff going on. Let's move along. I understand that the House, the Republicans in the House, again, all of this talk about Russia sanctions. Evidently, they're softening some of the new sanctions on Russia.
Well, they haven't yet, but the White House is putting pressure on them too. The Senate passed its bill, and it's a tough bill to increase sanctions on Russia. And they passed it with only two people voting against it. Everybody else voted for it to increase sanctions on Russia. So it's gone to the House now, who have promptly sent it to committee, which is a way of slowing it down. And the White House is now pressing House Republicans to soften it. Now, the Trump administration is saying, well, don't toughen sanctions against Russia because it could make it more difficult to make things easier and promote cooperation with Russia.
Right, and it'll break one of his campaign pledges.
Yes, yeah, and he also has tweeted a few times today, basically saying that Russia probably doesn't seem to have believed again that the 17 intelligence agencies said that Russia did hack into and was trying to mess up the election.
Yeah, but I had a fairly liberal guest on this week who said, well, it was only actually 3 who came out and said that.
Who said that?
David Swanson we had on. And look, he's an anti-war guy. And look, I'm anti-war as well. I get it. I get you don't want to ramp up these tensions, and I get that. I do. But it was his position. There's absolutely no evidence. He's seen nothing to suggest that the Kremlin had anything to do with the election and meddling.
I see.
So you've got
read
those.
The report? Has he read the report?
No, I'm sure he read parts of it. Maybe the discussion draft.
Yes, the discussion draft. Yes.
So
has he read the NSA document that Reality Winner, she of the ludicrous name, leaked to The Intercept?
Yeah, just because of the name, that's CIA.
Yeah.
Nobody names their child Reality.
Nobody names their child Reality Winner.
There you go. So last question I've got for you, what's the Democratic message out of this? I mean, they can no longer say that they're hiding it after 11 o'clock because maybe noon or maybe 1 or 2 or 5 or whenever they decide to finally get it out. What's the message, do you think?
Well, Nancy Pelosi is speaking now.
Okay.
And she obviously hasn't seen it, so she's not bothered what it says.
All right.
But
because here's the thing.
Apparently there are deep cuts to Medicaid. It doesn't matter what it says. It doesn't matter what it says. It's bad.
Yep.
And that's all. She said Trump care inflicts great suffering on veterans, seniors, and rural communities. It is a job killer, too, she says.
Yeah. Here's the last bit. Will there be a Republican dumb enough to say, when you read it, you'll love it? Just kind of asking.
Oh, that's wonderful. I don't know, and I just wonder, once they've read it, how many Republicans ultimately will say no.
There you go. They're just hoping for 50 so Pence can cast the deciding vote. And again, it blows my mind. Needed 60 to pass it. We only need 50 to destroy it. Victoria, appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
Always great talk with you. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
The cries of war will sound the day we stand before the dawn of a new world.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
We're here today to allow citizens from around the country to be able to speak about what these proposals mean to tens of millions of Americans.
Michigan U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democratic senators and rural health care providers testified Wednesday that Trump care would devastate rural health care. Republican Senate leaders are conspiring in secret to destroy the Affordable Care Act and replace it with something that covers less and costs more with not a single public hearing. So Democrats held their own hearing on Trump care's impact on health care in rural America.
These proposals they're putting together will devastate rural communities. Medicaid covers nearly half of the children in small towns and rural areas in Michigan and across the country. Half. Medicaid covers more than half of all seniors in nursing homes. The Republicans are proposing legislation that will gut Medicaid health care.
Washington Senator Patty Murray says based on what's known so far about the Republican health care bills, Trump care would be a disaster for rural America.
By allowing insurance companies to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions, Trump care will disproportionately hurt families in rural communities. And this bill, by ending Medicaid as we know it, would put a lot of our rural hospitals at risk of closure. In addition to raising health care costs and throwing tens of millions of people off coverage.
Oregon Senator Ron Wyden.
This House bill would hit Oregon and rural communities like a wrecking ball.
Phil Ennin heads community hospitals and wellness centers in Ohio.
Passage of the AHCA means we're looking at millions of dollars of revenue losses. The very survival of our independent hospital is in play.
Chuck Duarte is the CEO of Community Health Alliance in Nevada.
Potential loss of health coverage for tens of thousands of rural Nevadans will also make it more difficult for them to afford care. It'll result in delays in care, exacerbation of chronic disease, and delays in getting addiction services and mental health services, which will result in death.
Immigrants are marching here, no papers, no fear. Immigrants are marching here, no papers, no fear.
Union members and community supporters rallied in San Francisco to protest the ICE detention of Painters Union member Hugo Mejia and United Brotherhood of Carpenters member Rodrigo Nunez. The two were handed over to ICE when they showed up for work at Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. They've been in detention for over a month with no hearing yet on their cases. Hugo has been a Painters Union member for 10 years. Nady Dominguez is with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades.
We are here because what's happening to Hugo and Rodrigo is not just unfair, but unjust.
WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
Well, I know that somewhere down inside they're just feeling small and scared. And they need to know that someone out there cares. Have you hugged a Republican today? Have you tried to spread your love to those who love the NRA? Though they might be quite reluctant, 'cause they'll wonder if you're gay. You should hug a Republican.
Yes, hug a Republican, or at least today call one. Make sure that your voice is heard on this horrible health care act. Because here's the thing, and this is the part that's infuriating, but highly predictable. The lobbyists for the healthcare industry evidently yesterday afternoon met with Republican staffers to view the horrible healthcare bill, the draft, the discussion draft. So first you got the lobbyists, they got to see it. Then last night, Wednesday night, you saw officials from the White House traipsing over to Capitol Hill to get their view of it. Odd that the lobbyists get to see it before the White House gets it. And, so they've seen it. You know who hasn't seen it? the Democratic leadership, the Democratic senators, and oh, by the way, us. We still don't know how much harm the Republicans are going to inflict upon us. And still holding it off. It's mind-blowing. Anyway, here to talk about the horrible Health Care Act, I've asked our good friend Helene Olin to come talk with us. Author, journalist, one of Business Insider's 50 women who are changing the world. Helene, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me on. The bill was just released, so I'm sitting here reading through it, reading through Twitter, trying to see what everybody else is seeing. It's really something else.
The discussion draft, I wonder, 4th of July seems to be the day that they want to have this all wrapped up, and I keep going back to the Democrats rammed the Affordable Care Act down our throats. They didn't let us see it. They didn't, and yet the Republicans have done, well, worse than what they claimed Obama did.
Right. Well, what's going on is 4th of July is recess, right? So they want to get this done before they're going to encounter any angry constituents at town halls. That's sort of the idea here.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Helene.
For what it's worth, the Republicans in the House encountered the angry constituents at the town halls, as we all know, and that didn't stop them from voting for this. Yeah. So I think that's something to keep in mind here, that this is a very serious threat, and that this could quite likely go through at this point. Everybody has a different take on it, but I think relying on Senate moderate Republicans to stop this is something of a losing strategy.
Yeah, especially when you only need 50.
They get to step up to the plate on pretty much anything, right? We've been dealing with this now for a long time.
Yeah, especially when you only need 50 votes. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. It's mind-blowing to me that it took 60 to pass it, but it's only going to take 50 to destroy it.
Right. And that this is just going through with no hearings and no public attention whatsoever. And as you put it, the insurance industry got to see it before the Democrats or the people, right? And that's something else that's really worth noting here. Where the heck is the insurance industry? Why aren't they speaking up about this? And you can only assume that they're just not that unhappy about it, because presumably if they thought they were in real trouble, they'd be speaking up, right?
Absolutely.
So that should tell you everything you need to know about why insurance is probably really not the way to ensure that everybody gets proper health care in this country.
Again, absolutely agree. But here's the thing. You've got to feed the insatiable need of greed for the 1% and these big industries. And I thought the Affordable Care Act had done that. We guaranteed them profits, and that wasn't enough.
Well, they just don't want to cover these people at all. I think that's what's going on. Some of them do. Don't get me wrong. There seems to be this tier of insurers that want to cover them. But in terms of the major insurers, they're pulling out of the exchanges. They simply don't want any part of this.
Right. But are they pulling out?
These are, as a rule, not particularly profitable people. And profit is your major motive. That's how you're going to think.
Yeah.
So to go back to this, though, this is just simply appalling. It seems like an attempt to satisfy Donald Trump's statement from last week that he thought the House bill was mean. That was, of course, after he celebrated its passage, right?
Yeah.
And so you see things like, well, we're not going to take out the pre-existing conditions, right? The House bill had said that could be gone. But in fact, what this does is, for instance, an insurer can offer up incredibly skimpy plans that were quite common before the ACA. The sort of plans that forgot to cover hospitalization, say, or refused to cover cancer drugs, fill in the blank, right? So essentially, this is a ban. This isn't a ban on pre-existing conditions, because there's a ton of ways around it. We find out you have cancer, we simply don't have to sell you a policy that covers it. Very basic, right? So that's a huge problem right there. But it's going to take a little bit of digging to figure that out. It's not as easy as it was before.
Yeah, for those of us who, and look, I had a micro plan, 30-some years ago. Where, you looked at it and you go, I have a card, but it covers nothing. And it cost me a boatload of money, and it covers nothing. We're going back to those days. Because one of the things, look, I wasn't a huge fan of the Affordable Care Act, to be honest. I was a single-payer guy. I wanted a public option at the barest minimum, so that if insurers decided, like they're doing in Ohio, to pull out, that there would be something there to go, fine, go. But, there were some things that it did well. the idea of essential benefits. There was a minimum. When you bought something, you knew that at least there was a bare minimum of coverage. You knew you got cancer drugs if you got cancer. You knew hospitalization was covered. There was at least that bare minimum.
It was a bare minimum, but I think one of the reasons, frankly, we're in this boat today, aside from the fact that the Republicans are beyond rapacious, right, is the fact that it really didn't help in as much as people had hoped. People's costs continued to go up out of pocket. The vast majority of people who weren't getting coverage through the Medicaid expansions were dealing with deductibles in the thousands upon thousands of dollars, which essentially made these plans, I don't want to say unusable, that's not quite the right word, but basically caused them to build up debt the moment they tried to get health coverage.
Right.
I actually did a piece about this for The Atlantic recently, not so much about the Affordable Care Act, but simply about the increasing prevalence of high deductible plans and what this is doing to people's budgets. And I do believe that one of the reasons there was so much popular anger about the Affordable Care Act wasn't the Affordable Care Act itself, but the fact that people's insurance, whether they were getting it through the exchangers or through their employer, was coming with increasingly high deductibles, and they were paying more and just not seeing that they were getting any help.
Right. So
this is a bit of a digression, but I think it's an important one because it goes back to the real problem here, which is that people can't afford health care.
But, again, it's a problem that you go, was this brought on because of the Affordable Care Act, or was this the way the industry was going anywhere? Because I've got people telling me, well, the Affordable Care Act made premiums skyrocket. I'm going, did you not know premiums were going up at an alarming rate before the Affordable Care Act?
Oh, right, absolutely. I mean, the Affordable Care Act didn't cause the problem, but it didn't do anything to solve it either, really. And the problem is, of course, is most people aren't on the Affordable Care Act. So they were just seeing their bills continuing to go up, and they were annoyed. And, the thing we always forget is most people aren't in the intricacies of these things, right? So they're looking at it, and they're thinking, oh, my God, the Affordable Care Act did nothing for me. Of course it wasn't going to do anything for you, right? But that's how a lot of people interpret it. But meantime, of course, to bring it back around here, this is going to make things much, much worse for everybody, okay? Because somebody, if this passes, somebody is still going to have to pay these bills, right? One of the reasons we did the Affordable Care Act was not just because we felt it was a good idea to expand health care to people, which is the morally right thing to do, but because people who were on employer plans were facing huge increases, not just in their deductibles, but in their premiums because of the cost of covering the uninsured, who, when they get sick, turn up at hospital emergency rooms, right? This is what people do, because hospital emergency rooms have to take care of you. Hospitals then, in turn, raise the cost to the people covered under insurance.
Certainly.
That will happen again under this, right? Because somebody still has to pay the bill.
And you're also going to see, like where I live in a fairly rural community, you're going to see the hospitals go belly up, or at least the emergency room parts of them. Or the Republicans are going to pass the follow-up bill to this, which is to say that hospitals don't have to cover you unless you have insurance, so we're just going to let you sit on the curb and die.
Right. And, that's quite possible. I mean, the thing is, though, this bill is just horrendous. I mean, we still don't have a CBO score on it, but we know that the House bill was going to result in about 23 million people losing all health insurance coverage over a period of a decade. The cuts to this one there's a lot of PR going on here. The Medicaid drop is mostly, comes in after 2021, i.e. after most of these senators come up for re-election.
Right.
But at the same time, it's actually more severe than the House bill in the long run. The subsidies are actually cut from 400% of poverty line to 350%, which is a huge, huge increase in cost to a lot of people who will suddenly no longer be eligible for subsidies. Somebody pointed out to me today that that's going to be a lot of late middle-aged people, say between 55 and 65, who are, of course, the Republican base. This is not a good idea. So, it's one of these things that looks okay, but really long-term is a really, really bad thing.
Yeah, and again, it's to me, the attacks on Medicaid seem to be one of those Republican, on the wet dream list. If we could just destroy the safety net even further, and you look at the cuts that Trump wants in the budget and the cuts that they want to put into this horrible health care act, you're basically decimating Medicaid.
Right, and I think the thing that's really important to keep pointing out, and I do this because I think there's this idea out there that Medicaid is a bunch of, poor slackers who won't get a job, right? Which is simply not true to begin with. But it actually is more of a middle-class plan than people realize. And the reason is because it is what a lot of people use to pay, when their elderly parents end up in nursing homes. And this is what's going to happen to these people as this gets cut back. And that's a really good question. And nobody seems to have an answer for that, in part because very few people seem to be asking that question.
Yeah, because I've said a number of times, we do have a long-term care, policy in this country for working people, and it is Medicaid. When you're at the end of your life, if you run out of money, because for a whole bunch of reasons, being unlucky being a big part of it, or if you just didn't make enough over your work life, at least you're not going to be warehoused in some kind of a debtor's prison until you finally expire. We provide nursing care. I mean, there's a way. That's what this is. I mean, and a good portion of it of Medicaid goes to seniors.
Right, and it's and this is infuriating that this is just not getting that much attention. I do think some of the issue is people do have limited attention spans. This is just how we are built, right? There is a lot of news about Russia right now, legitimately so. I'm not questioning the need for it, but it is eating into the coverage of this as well. And people need to really be aware that this is going on out there, and that this can, even though it just looks like it's going to be just simply people who are on the exchanges, this really is going to impact everybody.
No, I mean, it's going to be devastating. And here's the frustration that I have is you're talking about a sixth of our economy. And going to be more than that in the coming years, especially as baby boomers need more and more care. All done under the cloak of darkness, all done by 13 rich guys who, they're never gonna want for anything healthcare wise because they're all millionaires.
Right, and multiple millionaires, right? Because even being a millionaire doesn't always protect you when it comes to health insurance bills, right? As we all know, cancer drugs can run over $100,000 a year now. I mean, the issue is that this just seems to be going through on a super fast track, and people, I mean, it's horrible, and people just seem to be less aware of it than they were even a month ago. And this has to change. And the last thing, I know we're probably on limited time here, is that the Democrats also need to really step up here. There has been talk of slowing down the Senate. It really needs to begin happening. There was a bit of a movement toward it earlier this week. It needs to happen. So it's not just a matter of calling Republican senators. It's also a matter of calling your Democratic senators and telling them that you want them to slow this down by any means possible. And there are procedural ways to slow down the Senate so that this is possibly not comes up before July 4th by introducing endless amendments, by insisting on vote counts, and so on.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I have no doubt that the Republicans will break whatever rule necessary to ram through their poison.
I think we get to a point. I mean, this is another conversation, right? But at a certain point, you have to ask if we're so afraid they're going to cut the rules, and do away with the rules, and we're not doing anything while we have them. What's the point anyway, right?
Oh, it was the argument I made over the filibuster. I think the Democrats did the right thing. I thought they should have.
I do too, actually. I absolutely agree with you. I mean, at a certain point, you can't live afraid all the time. I mean, I think this is a bigger problem in the Democratic Party, right?
Agreed.
We tend to be defensive. We don't tend to step forward. We're always doing rearguard actions, and we don't push Medicare for all as we're pushing to protect the ACA, right? John Ossoff, whatever else you think about him, very much said, he wasn't really didn't want to discuss single payer at all. Probably not the right answer.
Yeah.
This is a real issue in our party. I like to always say, you give people a choice between a real Republican and a centrist Democrat, they'll go with the real thing every time.
Yeah, I think originally it was Harry Truman who said that.
Was it?
It's common sense, though.
It is common sense. It's total common sense.
But here's the thing, and this is where we could wrap this up. I mean, I'm of the mindset, even if this doesn't pass, and there's some talk that it might not. We'll see. That's why we play the game. but I would argue that the Republicans have already done enough to destroy the Affordable Care Act and to cause the chaos and the death spiral that they keep talking about and they keep dreaming of.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the uncertainty is all but certain to destroy this within 2 or 3 years, regardless of this happening. And I think that's why it's so important to emphasize that there is a solution for this. And whether you think that's Medicare buy-ins, a public option, Medicare for all, it has to be out there and it has to be front and center because people react to positive change. They don't want to simply see that, we're just fighting in defensive crouches all the time. You have to be moving forward, and that's a really important part of this that's getting lost.
Now, is this change just for change's sake, do you think?
This is simply the Republicans trying to, make their base happy, right? They said for 7 years, right? We're going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. We're going to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they apparently feel they need to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Do they really want to do this? I have no idea.
Yeah, but repealing the Affordable Care Act and then replacing it with something worse, I don't know how that helps the base. Unless the base is the insurance industry and Wall Street, who are the ones who are going to be benefiting wildly from this.
Well, I mean, Trump was running a con from the get-go, right? I said this last year. I mean, he campaigned he wasn't going to cut Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. He's already, what is he doing, right? I mean, he's gone after Social Security's disability insurance. This is a Medicaid cut. I mean, it's absurd. And at some point, the base is going to figure out they were had. There doesn't seem to be any question about it. I mean, among other things, is the base is very reliant on Medicaid to pay for drug addiction treatments, right? Where is the most drug addiction problems? It's in the areas that supported Trump most strongly. I don't think putting it off for 3 years is going to make a huge difference here, right? Unless the opiate crisis goes away overnight, which I don't think it is. They're going to figure this one out eventually.
I got to be honest with you. I look at this, and maybe it's what we need. Maybe the shot of medicine, the wake-up call, whatever it is that you want to use, maybe the pain and misery that this is going to cause is what we need. I don't know. Helene, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Always great talking with you.
Oh, thank you for having me on, and the same.
I appreciate it. Again, if you want to check out her website, HeleneOlin.com, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. She does some fantastic writing. Fantastic. Good stuff. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day that the Cuyahoga River, which winds its way through Cleveland, Ohio, caught on fire. Cleveland was once the 6th largest city in the nation. During the early 20th century, the city had a booming steel industry. Clevelander John D. Rockefeller made the city a leader in oil refining. But after World War II, industries left strong union cities like Cleveland and Detroit. These jobs moved south and overseas, where wealthy industrialists could exploit workers in markets with weak labor protections. As a result, Cleveland fell on hard times. During the 1960s, the city lost 150,000 residents. As jobs left town, so did the workers. The once proud factories that lined the banks of the Cuyahoga River had brought jobs to the city, but they also pumped pollution into the waterway. When a passing train put off sparks, the river oozing with oil and debris caught fire. It was not the first time that the river ignited. Time magazine posted dramatic photos of the burning river, although the photos were actually from an earlier blaze. The pictures helped to fuel the growing environmental movement. They gave momentum to the passage of the Clean Water Act. The Cuyahoga was not the only urban river impacted by industry. The Time article described how, quote, Omaha's meat packers filled the Missouri River with animal grease balls as big as oranges. Today, one of Cleveland's breweries sells a popular Burning River Pale Ale. The Burning River is part of the history and the folklore of the city.
Burn on, big river, burn on. Burn on, big river.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So while we're going to be taking health care away from 23 million people, killing some 29 to 55,000, again, I keep going back. What if we had a terrorist attack that killed 29,000 people? What would we do then? And I would argue we do. We've got a terrorist attack going on right now. It's the Republican health care plan. What's going on is, you look at the raiding of the coffers, the grand heist that's going on. The Trump administration is calling for sharp reductions in funding programs like homeless shelters, places for the poor to find shelter. Done. All of these programs to combat homelessness, no, with one exception. And not surprisingly, the way that Trump makes money. Understand, the federal government gives out a bunch of money to private landlords to house people. One of the Obama administration ideas was to rapid housing. It didn't matter. We were getting people into houses. We were getting them into a place that they could have permanent residence. Because there's so many things that if you don't have a permanent residence, it's impossible to figure out. Getting a job, getting voter registration, whatever, all of this stuff. That's the part that Trump's going to keep. And why? Well, it turns out that Trump's got partial ownership of Starlet City, which is the nation's largest subsidized housing complex. Which evidently Trump owns a portion of there in Brooklyn, New York, that has earned him since January of last year and April 15th, just between that tax year, about $5 million. You go, it's just $5 million. He's a billionaire. It's still $5 million of money that went to him that didn't go to providing services to the homeless. It's insane. You couple this with, and I'm telling you, this is going to be the most entrepreneurial president in history. He may not be a billionaire now. I guarantee when he walks out of the White House, he will be, because now the first re-election campaign, he's barely been president a couple of months, already doing the re-election campaign stuff. June 28th, there's going to be a major donor event, and you know where. It's going to be at the Trump International Hotel there in Washington, D.C. And this is raising a lot of questions. All of this money coming into the White House, coming into the president, that's going to go back to him. Just like you see, and again, people ask me why I'm against charity, why I'm against some of this stuff. It's this kind of profiteering that drives me just absolutely insane. Just nuts. And finally, before we go to the next break, remember we're going to keep jobs here in the U.S. Remember America First? Well, evidently there's some talk that Lockheed Martin is going to send its Texas-based F-16 production line to India. Because guess what? India is doing a Made in India campaign. And they want to buy a number of, I guess it's 70 of the F-16s. But they're saying, we'll buy them only if you make them here. Only if you take those production jobs from Texas, move them to India, and oh, by the way, we want a transfer of technology. And you go, hold on a second. Hold on. Is anyone else freaked out by the fact that we're allowing these corporations who have developed technology for our security and our national defense to then go, you know what? We're going to move it overseas and we're going to share with other people. Now, according to the report, the deal would allow India to export the F-16s to other countries interested in the fourth-generation fighter. Over 3,000 F-16s are flown by 26 countries, according to the release. So we're going to take production out of Texas, move it to India. This is what they want to do. And there's reports that the Trump administration is A-OK with it. We're going to move this over there so that they can create those jobs in India, build them there, and then export the damn planes. Guess where they're going to export them to, I'll bet you? Back here. Are you okay with that? Is that America first? Is that draining the swamp? Wow. All I can come up with is wow.
I'll never be.
Quick break. Right back.
I'm with you now until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
I think of freedom in positive aspirational terms, such as found in FDR's Four Freedoms, or in the uplifting songs of freedom sung by oppressed people everywhere. But right-wing ideologues have fabricated a negative notion of freedoms derived from their twisted concept of individual choice. You're, quote, free to be poor, to be politically powerless, or to be ill and uncared for, they say. It's all a matter of decisions you freely make, and our government has no business interfering with your free will. This is what passes as a philosophical framework guiding today's Republican congressional leaders. For example, they say their plan to eliminate health coverage for millions of Americans and to cut such essential benefits as maternity care for millions more is just a matter of good old free market consumerism. As explained by Jason Chavitz, a Utah Tea Party Republican, Americans have choices, and so maybe rather than getting that new iPhone that they just love and they want to go spend hundreds of dollars on that, maybe they should invest in their own health care. Lest you think that Jason must simply be an oddball jerk, here's a similar deep insight from the top house Republican, Speaker Paul Ryan. Freedom is the ability to buy what you want to fit what you need. Yes, apparently you are as free as you can afford to be. As Vice President Mike Pence recently barked, Trump cares your own philosophy is all about, quote, bringing freedom and individual responsibility back to American health care. This is Jim Hightower saying, the GOP's austere view is that getting treatment for your spouse's cancer should be like buying a new pair of shoes, a free market decision by customers who choose their own price point, from Neiman Marcus to Goodwill, and some go barefoot. But then, that's their choice.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So the Republican Horrible Care Act has dropped. The discussion draft is being circulated. And as I said earlier, very telling that industry lobbyists saw it first, the White House, and, well, just now after a whole day, the Democrats. They will get a piece at it. And ultimately, eventually, we may find out how bad this is going to be. But here to talk about what we know so far, I've asked Sam Berger. He's a senior policy analyst there at the Center for American Progress. Sam, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.
So lobbyists got to see it. Then the White House got to see it. Now we're seeing it. How bad?
Well, so we just got our first look at this about 30 minutes ago, so I think the details are still being figured out. But basically, this looks like the House bill. It keeps the same basic principle of cutting coverage for millions of people in order to pay for tax breaks for the wealthy insurance companies and drug manufacturers. We'd said this before. When you start with the core of a bill whose purpose isn't to help people, but instead to give a big tax break to those who don't need it, you're going to see something similar on the other end. And, that's what it's here. I mean, I think there are obviously some different details, but that core structure is the same. The cuts to Medicaid, the elimination of the Medicaid expansion, all of these things are still in the bill, at least based on an initial look.
Yeah, I mean, as I look at this, and again, a lot of this is what the fringe of the Republican Party has wanted for generations, which is to destroy the social safety net and gut Medicaid. But I would argue this is even worse than the mean that Donald Trump called the House plan.
Well, I think there are some ways. I mean, we're still working through all of the details and how it all fits together, but it certainly looks concerning, and like the cuts may be even deeper than the terrible cuts we saw on the House bill side.
I like it's concerning. No, the concern is that we got 23 million people who are going to be uninsured, and somewhere between 29,000 and 55,000 people who are going to die. That's more than concerning to me, because I could be one of those 29,000 to 55,000 people, Sam. So could possibly you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't mean to in any way shortchange, how terrible this bill is. I think just when you get into the particulars of exactly where it's terrible, we need a little bit more time to figure it out, if that makes sense. I mean, what we know is they've kept the same core principle, which is take coverage away from people in order to pay for tax breaks for the wealthy. Exactly how many people are going to lose coverage, exactly how terrible it will be. Some of the kind of details we'll need a little bit of time to look into the legislative language, but there's no surprise here in terms of the general thrust of this bill, which is hurting millions of Americans in order to give tax breaks to those who don't need it.
I mean, it's insane, but again, this is who they are. And at the end of the day, I hear people calling this Trump care, and I'll be honest, this isn't Trump care. I don't think he had his fingers on any part of it. This is the Republican Party's ideological care plan. This is what the party believes, and I think the people who are members of that party need to realize that this is the core value of the party that they say that they're part of.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look now. I mean, the Senate was supposed to completely start from scratch, they claimed. It wasn't going to be anything like the House bill. They were going to fix the problems. Now we've seen what they've put together, and it looks just like the House bill. The president has said the House bill was mean. It needs more heart. I don't think you're going to see any of that in the Senate bill. And they've had 7 years to think about what it is that they would do, and the best they could come up with was stripping coverage from people and giving more tax breaks.
I mean, the tax break part of this is I think one of the most offensive. I mean, because we're the richest country in the world at its richest point in history, and yet we're saying that there are millions of people who we're just not going to deal with. You're on your own, brother.
Yeah, I mean, and I think people should really understand it. It's not correct to really think of this as a health care bill. A health care bill implies that it's a bill intended to improve or even address problems in health care. It's a tax cut bill that's being paid for with your health care or your neighbor's health care. If you have an elderly parent, their health care, perhaps your children's health care. That's what's really happening. It's a tax break bill that's taking away health care from millions of people as the pay for.
Now, as I understand, you had worked during the Obama administration and had some part in the implementation and this whole thing. Were there problems with the Affordable Care Act? I mean, because we hear that the sky's falling, it's the end of the world. Were there actual problems that you would say there were that we needed to fix?
Well, I think there were always things that could be improved. I mean, one of the things that we would really like to have seen was an increase in the subsidies that help people afford coverage. The introduction of a public option, which would help bring down costs and ensure, competition in areas that have fewer providers or fewer insurers. These are ideas that we've been putting forward for years, but Republicans in Congress weren't really interested in fixing the bill. I mean, I think that's perfectly evident now when you see them doing everything they can to try and undermine the Affordable Care Act, even while they're debating legislation to completely repeal it. But there are, of course, improvements that can be made. In fact, this is the case with all major legislation, Social Security Act, Medicare. Every big piece of social legislation can always be fixed, can be improved upon, and as you start to implement it, you find things that could be done better. The difference here is that Republicans weren't interested in working to actually help people. They decided to use this as a political tool to try and advance their own partisan advantage. And so, obviously, we did our best, given the circumstances, to try and implement the law. And I think we did, quite a good job. But would we have loved to be able to make tweaks and improvements as we discover things that we've done better? Of course. Yeah, but unfortunately, the political will to actually help folks that needed health care wasn't there on the other side of the aisle.
And the reason I bring that up in a way I think it's so important is there were those years while the Republicans were railing against it that the tweaks could have been made to improve things while they had drawn a line in the stand and been in absolute opposition. So even those improvements that could have happened didn't. And because I go back to Medicare. Medicare wasn't perfect when it was passed. It was a number of tweaks, a number of improvements that today you try and take Medicare away from a senior, they will beat you to death with their walker.
I mean, I think leaving aside the particulars of how people exactly would respond to losing Medicare, obviously they care about it a tremendous amount. And I think people care about their Affordable Care Act coverage as well. They care about their Medicaid coverage. And, if we had an opportunity to improve that coverage even further, remember, this is a bill that came in wildly under budget. For all the talk about how the ACA was going to explode the budget, you notice you don't hear folks on the other side say that anymore because the cost savings were greater than folks even anticipated. So there is extra money there that could easily be used to increase subsidies to help more people afford coverage, to bring down deductibles, that sort of thing. But that's not what we're seeing. In fact, the Republican plan as put forward seems to be the exact opposite, to increase deductibles, to basically push folks into plans that offer very skimpy coverage, and have huge deductibles that make it difficult for them to utilize care at all.
Yeah, one of the things that bothers me, because you've used the word subsidies a couple of times, and it's one of the failings, I think, of the whole thing is because you start creating this environment that the Republicans have used masterfully, in my view, of dividing people up, of pitting one group against another. It's amazing to me how they've been able to pit men and women against each other, having men go, well, why do I need maternity care? Well, because your wife or girlfriend might get pregnant, you dimwit. But it's been amazing to me how they've divided us up, and one of those divisions is based on income, of people saying, well, I make a little bit more money than you do. You're not deserving of the same things that I get. It just seems to me that was one of the initial flaws. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I think that what you're seeing in terms of the response to the Republican bill suggests that, in fact, people generally agree that folks should have health care coverage, and they don't like proposals that are going to strip them of that. The exact details about how you do it, I think, is one thing, but I feel like the attacks on the Affordable Care Act haven't really been attacks on the bill itself. They've been misrepresentations of what it does. Obviously, we all remember death panels, now the claims that it's the Affordable Care Act that's leading to premium increases, this sort of thing. It's these sort of disingenuous attacks that have really been utilized. I think the basic structure, the notion that people in this country deserve health care, and we should be able to provide it for them, there's pretty widespread agreement on that. I think that's a legacy of the Affordable Care Act in terms of demonstrating that people really do want to help one another out. They do want to have a society that takes care of its own, whether it be the elderly, children, or low-income folks. So I think the real problem here is that we're sort of in a unique time in which we have a hyper-partisan party that's really kind of lost touch with reality, lost touch with kind of concerning itself with improving people's lives, and seems more focused on advancing partisan ideological goals.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I hope we do care about each other, because I look at what's coming out of the House and the Senate right now. 23 million people left without coverage. Like I said, 29,000 to 55,000 possibly going to die because of this. And I hope you're right. I hope we do care about each other, because I'm sadly not seeing it.
Well, I will say I don't think that the House bill or the Senate bill necessarily reflect that, but I do think what would it be, 83% of people that don't like this legislation? That's, I think, the sign that the public, the vast majority of Americans, aren't where the radical right is right now in terms of stripping health care from people in order to provide tax breaks to those who don't need it. Instead, they stand with the rest of us, with trying to improve our healthcare system, to bring costs down, to expand coverage to those who need it, to make sure that people are getting the care that they desperately need. So I think as a nation, we're in a better place than our representatives are, and it's just it's very upsetting. It's very concerning to see them making these choices, even in the face of widespread public opposition to this terrible bill.
Yeah, I mean, but here again, you keep hearing though, Sam, that the Affordable Care Act made premiums skyrocket like they were never going up before.
Well, I mean, I think you're exactly right in terms of premiums increasing. Of course, the Affordable Care Act also helped lower those costs for what people actually paid versus the sticker price. And then we also had gotten to a point now where insurers had basically figured out how to price in this market. Remember, initially, back in the old days, pre-ACA, the way that that insurers handled this issue was they just didn't give people coverage, or they charged them tens of thousands of dollars more. The ACA said, no, you have to give coverage to everybody who wants it, and you have to give them all a fair price. And so insurers are trying to figure out exactly how to do that. Last year they'd sort of gotten to the point where they had figured out what their costs should look like, and we were expecting to have a much better year this year in terms of premium increases. But then, the Trump administration actively worked to undermine the market, threatening to withhold billions of dollars payments from insurers, threatening not to enforce the individual mandate, which would drive out healthy and young people and increase costs for everybody else. So, independent actuaries have looked at this and said this is probably increasing costs by 20 to 30%. I'll say that again, 20 to 30%, just because of what the Trump administration is doing. So when you start seeing these rate hikes this year, take that with a grain of salt, subtract out 20 to 30%, and see where you would be. In many cases, you'd be in the low to mid single digits or low double digits. And that reflects sort of where the market would be without these active efforts to undermine it.
It's just, again, as I've been saying, they've done enough already to destroy the Affordable Care Act, and this is only going to make it worse. Last question I've got for you, in the coming days is, what are you paying attention to? What are you looking for? And what should we be focused on as this? Because, look, there's going to be rhetoric all over the place. What should we actually be paying attention to?
Well, so in terms of what you should pay attention to, when the CBO score is going to come out, the Congressional Budget Office score, early next week, which will give a lot more texture and detail to the actual effects. I think the most useful thing always to look at is two numbers: the amount that's being cut from funding that goes to help people get coverage, and the amount that's being given in tax breaks to the wealthy, to insurance companies, to drug manufacturers. The House bill, it was about $1 trillion being cut from coverage in order to give over $600 billion in tax breaks. And that's the real key. All this talk doesn't really mean anything. When you cut $1 trillion from coverage, you're going to get a tremendous amount less of it. And so those are, I think, important numbers for people to keep in mind. And obviously, of course, the number of folks that are going to lose coverage itself. In terms of what people can do, I would just say we're in a critical moment right now. This bill has been done entirely in secret. Folks have been coming up with proposals, but no one has really known what it does. No one has known the effect that it will have. They haven't talked to patients groups, to doctors, to experts. This is a moment for people to really reach out to their representative and tell them if they don't support this bill, not to. Basically what this bill will do to them, the effect that it will have on their lives, whether it be putting them into crippling debt, whether it means losing coverage that they desperately need to stay alive, whether it means, making it difficult for them to keep an elderly parent in a nursing home. I mean, there's going to be widespread negative effects of this bill, and we're in a critical moment for people to share that with their senators and tell them why they don't want them to support it, and that if they do support it, that they won't be supporting them the next time they come up for a vote. These calls really matter, and people need to make them now if they care about protecting healthcare in this country.
No, I'm right there with you. And again, to highlight what you just said, $1 trillion being cut so we could give $600 billion to wealthy people. I point to my Tea Party friends who always say, I want redistribution of wealth. This is massive redistribution of wealth from poor and working class people to the wildly wealthy. Sam, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great talking with you, Sam Berger, Senior Policy Advisor there at the Center for American Progress. If you want to check out their website, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1999. That was the day 5,000 textile workers at 6 Fieldcrest Cannon Mills in North Carolina began voting for representation by the Union of Needle Trades, Industrial, and Textile Employees, better known as UNITE. The victory, later validated by the NLRB, was a significant win for labor in the anti-union South. The union's organizing director, Bruce Ronner, stated, quote, "It feels like we just organized GM. Suddenly, we've got a beacon to show other textile workers that they can do it." Labor historian Leon Fink noted that, quote, "It's a stunning victory for the union. It's the biggest breakthrough in a traditional Southern industry for probably the last quarter century." Then AFL-CIO President John Sweeney remarked that it was the largest union victory in a Southern textile mill in history. The election and victory came after 25 years of struggle and 4 previous attempts to organize at Fieldcrest Cannon Mills. Many noted that the young immigrant workforce made the difference. Conditions had been worsening at the mills. Workers, fed up with production line speed up, punitive decreases in piecework premiums, and company harassment, were compelled to vote union. One worker stated that he and many others were sick of lies management told to keep workers from voting yes in previous elections. Supervisors routinely intimidated workers to vote no with promises of higher wages, or when that failed, threats of deportation. Workers were barraged with various forms of anti-union propaganda. They found anti-union videos mailed to their homes. Some were paid extra to distribute Vote No t-shirts on the shop floor. The company finally recognized the union and negotiated a first contract that guaranteed higher wages, pensions, and other benefits.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. We start in Riyadh today, where Saudi Arabia's King Salman has made a major change in his line of succession, tapping his 31-year-old son, Mohammed bin Salman, to be the next in line to the throne. The Crown Prince is no stranger to politics. As Minister of Defense, he's led a military campaign in Yemen since 2015 and played a key role in persuading regional allies to join a Saudi blockade against neighboring Qatar. It's not hard to see that bin Salman's promotion sets up the likelihood of a more aggressive, nationalistic Saudi foreign policy for potentially decades to come. It helps, too, that bin Salman enjoys good relations with the Trump administration. He's reported to have a strong rapport with Jared Kushner and was dispatched to meet with President Trump one-on-one in Washington earlier this year. And here's a misleading headline to grapple with. A famine in the world's newest nation, South Sudan, is over. Famine, it turns out, is a very specific classification. For it to apply to a region or country, at least 2 people for every 10,000 must die on a daily basis from hunger, and 20% of families in a given area must be facing extreme food shortages. Acute malnutrition must also be over 30%. Those conditions are no longer being met, but that doesn't mean the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan is abating. Quite the opposite. According to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, 6 million people, or roughly half of the South Sudanese population, struggles to find enough food each day. That figure stood at 4.9 million just 4 months ago. The head of the Food and Agriculture Administration's Emergency Responses, Dominique Bourgeon, summed up the situation in South Sudan, saying, quote, "The crisis is not over. We are merely keeping people alive, but far too many face extreme hunger on the edge of a cliff." South Sudan continues to be beset by conflict stemming from a 2013 civil war. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Now, the time to call your senators. Call Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. Call Bob Casey. Call your senators. Tell them no. I mean, I don't know what else, how much simpler to put it. This horrible CARE Act, this massive, as Sam Berger points out, massive tax break, massive redistribution of wealth from the working class to the wealth class. You talk about that war between capital and labor. This is another one of those moments. This is another one of those moments where there was something to help workers to make it to the next day, something to help them support their families, a positive step forward. And as I've said, I was not a huge fan of the ACA, but it was a start. And I said at the time that it passed, there were a lot of things that I had some problems with. And I said, we will fix these. This is a good first step. But if you remember, and you go back, the Republicans immediately, from the very start, from Election Day forward, from Mitch McConnell saying we're going to make him a one-term president, to Rush Limbaugh saying, well, I hope he fails. They staked their flag in the ground, and they were the party of no. They were the party of obstruction, of delay, of gridlock, of shutting the government down. And yet 60 votes were gotten to pass this. 60 votes. And yet they're going to ram it through with 50. Think about that for a second. For all of the talk of, the Democrats didn't help us, which I remember at the time screaming, why are you spending so much time reaching out to people who hate you and are never going to come along? Even though this was their plan to begin with. And they did. Hundreds of amendments, hearings out the wazoo, in multiple committees. And yet it wasn't enough. It could have gone on forever, and it would have still been too much because something got passed. The vulnerable were helped. The exploited were helped. The desperate were helped. And oh, by the way, the working class and the somewhat well-to-do, they were helped as well. Problem is it didn't help the really wealthy. In fact, we asked them to contribute to help those at the bottom. And I remember at the time everybody screaming, this is redistribution of wealth. They're taking, and why should they take from rich people to pay for those lazy poor people? I remember saying at the time, because it's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, we've lost the difference between right and wrong. We've lost that moral compass that, I had always thought, when I hear someone say America's exceptional, I always come back to we're exceptional because of who we are and what we do, that we reach out a hand and we help others, that we make sure that people don't go hungry or homeless, that we care. This changes all of that. Honestly and truthfully, this is insane. And it's so much so that our status around the world is being challenged. In fact, I just came across a story yesterday from the Financial Times that points out that evidently the trip that Donald Trump was supposed to take to the UK, the state kind of dinner where we have a whole bunch of pomp and circumstance and all of that stuff, evidently not happening. The carriage ride that Trump wanted, evidently not going to happen. Because you didn't hear about it when Theresa May addressed Parliament. You didn't hear hey, we're bringing them in. But you know who they did have a state visit for? They're bringing King Felipe from Spain in July. So kind of interesting that our closest ally is kind of saying, no thanks. That's scary stuff. And you know what's even scarier? The fact that the state of Montana, and when will this nonsense go away? Evidently, the state of Montana, there's a group, a right-wing crazy group, who wants to put an initiative on the ballot to limit where people who are transgender can go to the bathroom. You can't make this up. What I'm waiting for is a state to say transgender people can't use the bathroom at all. They might have cooties. No. I'm challenging that exceptional thing. I really am. I'm challenging the thought that we're at all exceptional anymore. In fact, I would argue that we're anything but, given what we're doing in Washington and in state houses across the country. Anyway, today, if you missed any of the program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Back tomorrow at the AFTPA's convention in Harrisburg. Looking forward to that. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at the